Hi, everyone, and welcome back to The X, a podcast about how experience shapes everything from products to services to entire businesses. I'm your host, Brian McLean, and I'm here with Demetrius Madrigal. Today, we're going to talk about social media, its role in the news, and how these platforms are shaping social discourse and what it means for the election in November. Hey, man, happy Tuesday. How you doing?
Pretty good. I think this is a really interesting topic that we have today. I think for us coming as people who are really focused on the user experience, we kind of see this through a different lens, much more so than for some other things that we talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, social media has evolved a lot over the last, 10 or 15 years. I mean, you and I have been in this industry for a while, so we've actually had the opportunity to kind of see it change. I mean, when you think back, what was the first social media platform that you engaged with?
For me, I want to say I actually did kind of interact a little bit with Friendster, not a
Mhm.
ton, but the one that I really started using first was probably MySpace.
Yeah.
And then over time, that switched over to Facebook, and now it's kind of like right, Facebook's feels like it's on the decline a little bit as far as at least from a user perspective, and Instagram and some other things are popping up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I started with Friendster, like just kind of like played around with it a little bit, and then MySpace was pretty big. But the thing about MySpace that I really liked was the idea that you had to actually learn how to create your own page.
Yeah,
So like you stay up late and you're kind of hacking it so you can have cool backgrounds and music and stuff like that. And I felt like it was a great like intro into creating a place where it really represented you,
yeah,
right? So,
hmm
it's like this is what I look like, in my life at this moment in time. And I thought that was pretty fun, but it was also a barrier of entry for a lot of people because it was challenging in order to make cool backgrounds and stuff. So people, stopped doing it and I eventually kind of navigated away from it into this Facebook era, of like connecting one another and being able to make posts and stuff like that. But I remember Facebook before it even had its news feed,
yeah,
when it was just
yeah,
a matter of getting all your old friends together and linking up and communicating with each other. And that news feed fundamentally changed everything.
yeah,
They
absolutely.
call it news, right? But what it really was just like friend updates, right? And then over time, it evolved into like real news being posted on there, and then as well as quote unquote fake news and other things that were placed on the platform in order to kind of shift your perception of certain topics. When you first started using Facebook and you first started experiencing the news feed, was it the same as it is now? Like, did you feel the same way that you do right now?
No, it absolutely wasn't. I think somewhere along the lines, people point to kind of the IPO and the push to monetize heavily after that as being a
Hmm.
bit of a turning point. But in the early days, it was much more social than it is now. To a certain extent, I feel like calling it social media, especially Facebook in particular, is almost becoming a misnomer a little bit because so much of it now is focused on advertising and marketing, even just using the platform to create a page and market yourself for your company through Facebook. So much of the content that's put into the newsfeed are from corporations now.
Yeah, but it makes a lot of sense though, right? Because they're looking at the metric, right? And they're like, oh, there's X number of billion people on the platform. So that's where the eyeballs are, right? And then you look at the metric for how long each day people are actually on the platform itself.
hmm
And they're on there for a really long time, right? So from the perspective of like a news organization or a corporation, it makes a lot of sense that you want to get your ads, your content in front of where people are actually reading.
Yeah, and that's absolutely where the news industry started leveraging this platform in order to get eyeballs and at the time just to stay alive, because so many of them were suffering from the transition from print and TV to online, and they were figuring out like how do we get eyeballs, how do we attract users, how can we do this? And Facebook provided them a very easy approach to getting people, but it was also a little bit of a departure from what was traditional.
Well, why do you think people liked getting their news on Facebook? Because back when it first started, people loved it. They were like, "Oh, this is so cool." It's like a single source. Like, do you think it's just as simple as that? Like, you have your Facebook page open, and suddenly you can just click on links as they come through. Was it that basic?
I think at the time it helped people to stay informed, because it provided information that they might not have sought out. And it was somewhat curated by people within their social circle. And it still is to some extent today, but now with so many sponsored links and so many coordinated campaigns, whether they are actual misinformation campaigns or just corporations trying to promote their service offering, then it's not quite the same level of curation it is today than it was before. It's a little bit more of algorithms and marketing intruding on your social media time.
Yeah, there's a big discussion around the topic of these bubbles or these circles, right? So like the algorithm looks at Demetrius and says, "Oh, Demetrius likes X type of topics and seems to be more, let's say, left leaning rather than right leaning. So let's just serve him up those types of articles and those types of news organizations into his feed." Which, on one hand, you'd go, "Okay, great, they're giving me what I like and what I'm used to." But the argument is that when you do that, and we talked about this on the last podcast, then you're basically just kind of feeding you deeper into your own hole and not
Hmm.
giving you alternative perspectives. I mean, how do you feel about that?
Well, I don't feel like there is any kind of economic incentive to provide kind of objective reporting. And in fact, if you look at the use case, kind of the user journey for a user who receives news through Facebook or through Twitter or through a social network in general, it's very different from the traditional use case and user flow. So traditionally, what you would do is, oh, I'm interested in seeing what's going on in the news. Back in the day, that might be I'm going to turn on the 11 o'clock news, or I'm going to grab my newspaper. I'm going to be in the mindset of I'm going to consume news now. I'm going to read these articles. I'm going to get the facts. I'm going to form an opinion. And as things progressed, that changed from newspapers and TV to Google News and other aggregators, or directly to the website. And more recently, when it comes to the entry point being a social media network like Facebook, the flow is different. So it's not, and even the consumers themselves might be different because now it's being exposed to different audiences. So I feel like if you were to take a look at kind of the user journey diagrams that exist within some of these news corporations, what you might see is the user is coming in to their social media platform because they're interested in seeing what's going on for their friends, or seeing entertaining cat videos, or something else that you would associate with a social network, with social media.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And once they get there, it's the job of the social media intern or whoever is managing the account to interrupt them, to provide something so compelling that it catches their attention and diverts them from their original intention. So that,
Yeah.
of course, lends itself to sensationalism and really kind of big, exaggerated headlines and those kinds of things. And because the user isn't in the mindset of, all right, now I'm going to read a news article, a lot of times they don't. They just go off of the headline, and the headline can be misleading, and intentionally so, because it can be clickbait. And then
Yeah.
that, of course, just kind of creates a environment for misinformation.
Yeah. And, I think according to Pew Research Center, it said, I think there's something around 60 to 65% of all adults in the United States get their get their news from social media.
Hmm.
So this is a really big issue. I mean, because that's a big percentage of individuals consuming content in that way. And I want to be clear about something. What you're talking about is an actual strategy. So user interruption is something that is done on purpose, correct?
Yeah,
Meaning they're
absolutely.
trying to get you to stay on the platform by clicking on all these other interesting links that they think are going to grab you, even though you came in maybe to just see an update about a wedding post from a friend, and now you've spent 20 minutes reading a whole bunch of articles. The other point that you made that I wanted to talk about for a second was this kind of headline only consumption. So you and I both come from a background in psychology, and we know that you don't have to actually read and consume an entire article or an entire piece of information in order to already make an assumption in your brain about what it is or
Yeah.
what's happening, right? And
Hmm.
so just by simply like flooding an area with a ton of article titles about a particular topic and catching your kind of an emotional attention to it, it will shift how you think, and over time you'll marinate on it, you'll think about it, and in some studies I think it showed that it like fundamentally changed your decisions, right? And
Yeah.
so these are intentional strategies, not like by necessarily the person creating the technology like Facebook, but by the people who want to try to grab more users' attention online, like whether it be the
Hmm.
company or the organization or even a foreign entity like we're hearing about now for elections.
Yeah, and it feels like the kind of thing where the outcome might not be intentional per se, but it's kind of there's a little bit of an unholy kind of alliance between social media and news media, where news media needs to get in front of people, social media needs to populate their platforms with content, and social media provides them the tools to target specific people with specific beliefs that they are able to identify through their browsing habits, their posts, whatever it happens to be. So it can identify that so and so is left leaning or so and so is right leaning. So and so believes in this policy position, and so and so believes in the opposite. And the news media can use that information in order to target market and provide that user with specific news articles that reinforce their pre-existing assumptions or positions, rather than provide information that might help that position to evolve in some way.
Yeah, and that begs the question of like, where does this responsibility lie, right? Is it with the news organizations or the news agencies that are producing this content, or is it with the social media platforms that are distributing it, right? And this argument
Yeah.
is constant. I hear it like almost every day, right? Like, oh, it's look what Facebook did, and I'm like, well, yes, maybe they're part of the problem for sure, but also look at the titles of these articles, and they're clearly trying to catch you emotionally, in a moment of weakness, especially with things that are related to COVID or things that are related to the election. So what are your thoughts on how to kind of solve this problem of toxicity, right? And solve this problem of kind of user interruption and kind of sensationalism. Like
Well,
have you had any ideas on this?
yeah, I've had some brainstorm stuff. I mean, when you're talking about responsibilities, it's obvious that they're both there's responsibility on both sides, and there's also responsibility on the side of the consumer. The reality is that it takes work and a bit of discomfort for your understanding or your opinions on things to evolve and change, even if that's not necessarily changing sides left to right, but in order to recognize nuance in a position that you might not have seen before, and to modify your position so that it takes account of that nuance. That's work
Hmm.
that people aren't necessarily interested in doing, especially when they're there to watch cat videos.
Yeah.
Um, at the same time, I think there's responsibilities on both sides when it comes to news agencies and social media, because they aren't utilizing the tools that are available to them in a responsible way. They are economic incentive in order to just get as many eyeballs and sell as much advertising as possible. But
Hmm.
it's kind of you can shear a sheep many times, but you can skin them only once. And they're having a little bit of the strategy of skinning the sheep, because they're creating so much toxicity and negativity with their clickbaity articles and flame wars in the comments, that I think it's going to really turn some people off. I mean, you saw with Twitter when they were trying to sell the platform to Disney a while back, and Disney was like, "No, this is way too toxic. We can't get involved with this." So I think they're painting themselves in a corner, both from the experience of their platform as well as kind of their economic opportunities or alternatives going forward.
Well, I mean, I think to fix the problem, right, you basically have to say to yourself, we're okay with this company being a lot smaller, which a lot of them don't want to say, right? Because what you're doing is you're trying to look at the content that's being produced and put on the platform, figure out what stuff is garbage, and
Hmm.
what stuff is, toxic, and start cutting all those segments out. Well, what that actually does is it actually reduces your numbers, right?
Yes.
So people might look at it and say, "Oh my God, so many people are bailing from whether it be Twitter or Facebook or any of these other social networks." When in reality, what they're doing is just trimming the fat, right? They're just getting
Yeah.
rid of all the stuff that people don't want to consume or shouldn't be consuming. I mean, I heard a statistic a couple of months back that said that on a daily basis across all social platforms, there are approximately 1 billion pieces of misinformation being distributed from foreign countries. Like, think about that, 1 billion. That's how many of these, what do they call them? Like, social farms or whatever they call it, where people get
Hmm.
together and they sit in these warehouses and all they do is try to persuade you to believe one thing or another by dumping a bunch of garbage basically into the platform and kind of trying to shift the conversation online. I mean, so it
Yeah.
makes you kind of go like, okay, every time I log into one of these platforms, I have to be super, super scientific about how I think about each piece of information. When I see something and I read it, now I have to go look it up in a,
Yeah.
in a couple different locations and make sure that stuff is actually accurate. And that actually might be one of the solutions, right? If you're going to be a social platform that accepts news content, maybe there just needs to be some sort of regulation that says that you have to have at least three sources. It has to be marked as news. It has to be verified, which means you got to hire a lot more people in order to do this work. But at the same time, I think it cleans up the platform, makes people more trustworthy over time.
Well, I had a couple ideas, and one of them, and you can respond to this because your wife was a journalist. I don't feel like there is as much as I feel like there could be more done in order to kind of identify who are real trained and ethical journalists. And it's basically like a certification process, right? You have your electrician, your hairstylist, your plumber. They're all certified, right? They're certified in order to provide a service that's going to be safe. And lawyers do this, doctors do this. So many actually do go through a certification process. But it seems like anybody with a Twitter account and a podcasting microphone can just start calling themselves a journalist and start putting out news. And I think if there was a certification process, then you can start treating certified journalists and certified journalism a little bit differently than somebody who's just trying to make a name for themselves in an Alex Jones style by trying to be as inflammatory and sensationalized and clickbaity as possible.
Yeah, I agree. And what I'm concerned about is the election coming up and how social media might play a big role in shifting people's perception of each of the candidates. Not just for presidential candidates, but also for local elections and state elections and all the other different seats that are up for grabs.
Hmm.
How do we handle that, right? So, like, coming from the perspective of user researchers who get out there and we study people, we figure out what's going on, and then we help refine and build better products. What could we do in order to figure out how to kind of rein in on that, right, and make
Well,
sure that it's not shifting
yeah.
people's perception in an artificial way?
Well, I think one thing that is important is for the users, number one, to stand up and say this is unacceptable. And if this is going to be this kind of irresponsible Pizzagate style post to be put on the website, I think that has to somehow negatively impact these social media platforms in order for them to step in and say, okay, we're going to protect our brand and our financials by blocking this from happening. If there isn't a financial and economic motivation for doing that, they're just not going to do it. A company like Disney, for example, or Apple, whose brand is very important to them, who's well established, they have great financials. They're not in in a place of desperation as far as revenue in order to maintain their own success, they're the type who are much more likely to manage their brand perception and be very careful about not being associated with the David Dukes of the world. A Twitter or a Facebook, especially Twitter, who is in that point of desperation and very much concerned about making sure that they have enough revenue to keep going, they are going to be willing to do things that other companies aren't. And if the users can unite in a sense in order to make that a challenge for them on an economic level, then they're going to have to respond.
Hmm.
One thing that stands out for me, because you mentioned what are the possible solutions, and it's something that I actually predict is going to be happening going
Okay.
forward. Like with many things, we talked about how competition can be a little bit of a problem when it comes to news media because it ends up slicing up the market along ideological grounds. I
Yep.
think for social media, this is a situation where competition can help solve this problem. And it's one of the reasons why I thought that Facebook's acquisition of Instagram was a bit of a problem. And ideally, I'd love to see that divested. And that's because if you look at Instagram, I think we mentioned it last week, but there's no news on Instagram really. There's no news articles getting posted. It's just
No.
images and people respond to the images. You can't even actually post a link in a Facebook in an Instagram post.
Yeah, I love that.
And that is, and you saw demographically some people, especially younger people, moving more towards Instagram and other people kind of sticking with Facebook. And the same thing happens with TikTok, where you see an even younger crowd and it being largely less news heavy or political and just being a little bit more about the experience. And I think that will happen more and more. You look at Facebook and Twitter to some extent, and they're kind of like these big kind of omnibus experiences where it's they're trying to be all things to all people.
Hmm.
And I think if more social media networks step in, and it's very possible because so many people are dissatisfied with this with any given social media platform over time, it feels like it's kind of like a dance club where it's popular for 6 months and then it has to shut down and rebrand so that's the fresh new thing just because the appeal just wears off. I think the same thing kind of happens with social media networks.
Yeah, you
But
make a really good point because TikTok, for example, doesn't have any news really on it, and it's more of an
mhm,
quote unquote entertainment platform. I mean, you look at the people who had showed interest in acquiring TikTok early on, right? Like
yeah,
Microsoft, and I don't know, maybe they even had a talk with Disney. Who knows, right? Because it was a Disney
mhm,
executive that took over as CEO. But then Twitter also reached out to them and had conversations with them, and people love this platform, and it's growing in popularity. And guess what? It's not tied directly to a bunch of fake news and garbage articles that are dumped all over the platform. It's about creativity, right? People
yeah,
making funny videos, doing things that are really interesting, and it's actually creating deep engagement.
yeah. And I think that as I think there's an opportunity here for new social media platforms to step in and say this experience is about specifically this. It's not going to try to be everything like Facebook is. It's going to be for musicians for music, and this other one is going to just be for your friends, and this other one is just going to be about animals, and this one will just be about news. And Facebook might end up taking a little bit more of a long tail approach where they start catering to a specific audience in order to stay relevant. But I really feel like that's going to kind of be the future. It's like because right now Facebook is just like an old broadcast network channel. It's like CBS in the 50s, right? It's just trying to be everything. And what I think will eventually happen is where things will split out and you'll have the social media equivalents of Animal Planet and Comedy Central and Cartoon Network and all those things where it's each one of those is a little more specialized to a specific experience.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. The only thing that comes to mind is that the second that these smaller companies or more niche companies become popular, they instantly get absorbed, right, by the larger organizations because everybody kind of wants to cash out and have their big win, right? And
Hmm.
that's where suddenly it's all underneath Facebook again, or it's all underneath Twitter, or you know. it's hard to see the competition kind of really thrive and pull apart that whole entire segment
Hmm.
when they keep getting acquired.
Well, on a certain level, I'd love to see regulators step in and kind of at least slow this down, if not stop it for a period of time. But the reality is, even if they do get acquired, if they're providing a economically viable experience that allows their parent corporation to make plenty of money without having to rely on FSB misinformation campaigns in order to
Uh-huh.
generate revenue, then it's win-win, right? It's great for the corporation, it's great for the users, it's great for everybody except for Vladimir Putin. So
Yeah.
I think that in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't have to matter, but at the same time, it's probably better for everyone if more of these companies, social media platforms, have to succeed on their own rather than to succeed through manipulation of their revenue numbers that can lead to a an exit that then absolves them of responsibility for creating a successful platform and company.
Very true. And, when I think like 10 years out, and let's talk about our predictions right now, because like this is really an interesting kind of topic. Is when you think 10 years out, who do you think are the winners and losers, right? Of this space, because
Well,
there's a lot of them emerging right now. I mean,
yeah,
we forget also too that technically YouTube is social media, really,
sure.
right? I mean, and then we also Pinterest to some extent, right?
Yeah.
And we forgot the big one, Snap, right? Which is, I don't know. I think that one might not be around in 10 years, to be honest with you. But there's actually quite a few of them. So if we're looking at this as kind of a race to success over the next decade, who are your top three winners?
Well, to be honest, my number one is a platform that doesn't exist yet. It's
Okay.
somebody's going to step in. It's going to get hot. It's going to do what TikTok is doing now without any of the issues as far as security or their concerns when it comes to LGBTQ content. It's going to be something that people can just use and not have to worry about the issues that are going on in the background. Something's going to step in. It's gonna steal the thunder. I think that 10 years from now, quite a few of the platforms that are out there now aren't going to exist. I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say Snap is going to be gone. I actually think that TikTok is hot now, but it's going to be gone in 10 years. I know that people are going to hear that and say like, "What? How is that possible?" But
That's
between
because we can look back 10 years before and realize that half of the
yeah,
platforms we used are gone now.
yeah, it's like it's like, hey, Vine's gone. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody steps in and rips off what TikTok is doing. Doesn't have the weird backdoor connections to the Chinese government. Doesn't have any of the we're going to ban certain types of content because it's not acceptable in China, and they just steal their thunder. And the same thing with a lot. I think Snapchat is kind of already going in that direction. Also, I don't hear anybody really using Snapchat anymore. I check it every now and then, and I might have one of my friends post something, maybe two, but it's just really dropped off, and I don't really see the purpose of it anymore in a world where TikTok exists or
Yeah,
whatever TikTok's replacement will be.
for
Uh,
sure. But the thing is though, is that, you're talking about all these different platforms not being around in 10 years, and it makes me go, well, geez, I mean, maybe that's just the way things happen when it comes to social, right? Is that,
mhm,
we go through these waves, right? You and I have talked about this in the past. We go through these waves, and it's like, God, I remember Path. I remember all kinds of different social media companies that either got absorbed or gone, or, people just got bored of, right?
yeah.
And I can't think of any of them other than Twitter has been kind of holding strong, but it's got its weaknesses. Um, I can't think of any of them where I go, oh, they'll definitely be around in a decade. Like I can see Facebook being kind of
Yeah.
gone. And I don't mean gone like the company's gone, just that they're not really working in that whole like newsfeed kind of process anymore. It's just going to be different, you know?
Yeah, I think Facebook I think Facebook as a platform and as a company will still be around in 10 years, but it's not going to be what we see today. I think they're going to have to find a way to kind of break out and diversify into multiple platforms. And I think that's going to be in a reaction to what other companies are doing. And it's also going to get a little bit more difficult, I think, for them to continue to acquire if other competition steps in that has big money, like a Disney or a Microsoft or any of those people. I mean, if Microsoft steps in and is able to acquire TikTok and not ruin it, like most companies like Microsoft might do. Because I look at Microsoft and I think, all right, this is primarily an enterprise B2B company these days. Can they really run a social media platform for teenagers? I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know if they have the culture for it.
I'm not super confident in that. I mean, I know that they have the money and I know that they work their butt off because, we know people over there, and it's just, wow, I don't know, like just from a mental model of fit, right? I'm like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know how it's going to work out.
But I could see, for example, Netflix stepping in and saying, hey, we're going to start up a social media platform that is all designed around connecting filmmakers, actors, and other performers with their fans. And that's all
Yeah,
it's
I
going to
think
be.
that'd be
It's not
great.
going to be about political news. It's not going to be about medical information. It's not going to be about selling supplements. It's just going to be about, hey, you want to watch a movie with Robert Downey Jr.? Follow him, and maybe once every other month he'll watch like Iron Man or some other movie that he was in on a live stream, and you can kind of chat with him a little bit. Like, I can
Yeah, that'd be
totally see
super
that
cool.
happening, right?
Yeah,
And if that
I could definitely
happens,
see that happening.
and if Netflix does that, and it's a way for them to provide add-on experiences for their content, then I could see them stepping in and providing competition when it comes to acquiring other social networks.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that one. That's a very cool prediction. I think that that could happen. I really
Yeah.
do. And I actually think I'd be interested in being part of that. I mean, because I'm very much into media. So when I hear stuff like that, I go, "Oh yeah, that'd be really fun." And actually one of the companies that I invested into a little bit was Legion M. And they actually do this already, which is really cool. They actually get the filmmakers, the writers, everyone together, and they'll set up these like Zoom calls and these different Q&As, and they'll come in and you can just type in your questions and then they'll answer them live. And it's really exciting. It's really fun. So imagine having an entire social platform designed around that particular topic or those areas of interest. So
Yeah.
this was a fun conversation today. I think it was interesting to kind of dive deep into social and news and kind of what that looks like. What are we going to talk about next week?
So next week we're going to be talking about remote work. So we saw it explode with the pandemic and the shelter in place. What is it going to be afterwards? How is that going to affect the larger industry or the larger economy if quite a few people are now mostly working from home?
Yeah, and just to make a note to all of our listeners, these are the last two episodes of the season, and then we're going to start prepping for season 2. So hopefully you can listen in on those and you'll enjoy them. So thanks everyone for listening, and we will talk to you next week.